The laughter sliced through the air like glass breaking in a cathedral. It wasn't loud at first, just a small, dismissive chuckle from Mike Johnson, the kind that says this isn't serious. But in a room built on decorum, even a laugh can be violence. A few others joined him, low and cautious, testing the limits of what was allowed. The marble walls seemed to carry it farther than it deserved to go. The cameras caught everything, the tilt of his head, the smirk tugging at the corner of his mouth, the way his hand brushed the mic as if brushing off her words. And then the lens shifted, catching Jasmine Crockett in perfect stillness. She didn't blink, didn't move, just let the sound roll over her, steady as stone. That silence wasn't a weakness, it was a warning. You could almost hear her inhale, slow and deep, a breath that carried years of learning when to hold fire. The laughter faltered, like a wave that hit cold sand. The chuckles died one by one, replaced by the hum of fluorescent lights and the heartbeat of tension. Her eyes locked on him not with fury, but with precision. The kind of gaze that has ended arguments long before words arrive. Around her, aides froze mid-scribble, unsure if they were witnessing a debate or a reckoning. Mike Johnson shifted slightly, his smile stiffening as if realizing he had just walked into something larger than ego. And then came her voice low. Deliberate, unhurried. Is this what leadership sounds like now? The chamber went still. Even the cameras seemed to hold their breath. It wasn't a shout. It wasn't a plea. It was a mirror held up in real time, and everyone saw what stood reflected there. He tried to laugh again, softer this time, but it didn't land. The room wasn't laughing anymore. What followed was a silence so heavy it felt like gravity itself had changed direction. You could sense every ear tuning in, every eye watching to see if she would stop there or step further. But what she said next didn't just silence the room, it turned the entire chamber into ice. 20 minutes earlier, the air in the chamber had already been heavy. One of those hearings that felt less like oversight and more like theater. Cameras lined the walls, reporters hunched over glowing screens, and every word spoken seemed crafted for the evening news. Jasmine Crockett sat centered in the frame, posture straight, voice measured. She wasn't performing. She was documenting the truth. Her questions cut cleanly through the fog of political evasion. Line by line, she pressed for clarity on budget discrepancies, public funds rerouted, records withheld, numbers that refused to add up. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. The facts were shouting for her. Across the table, Mike Johnson shifted in his seat, lips tightening around a smile. He had seen this play before, righteous persistence, moral precision, and he'd learned how to defuse it. Not with facts, with mockery. Congresswoman, he said, the word dragging with condescension, are you suggesting that every number you don't like must be a conspiracy? A few chuckles rippled from his side of the room. It was meant to be harmless, a polite jab, the sort of laughter that writes itself off as charm. But in the echo, something cracked, the kind of crack only those who've lived it could hear. Because when power laughs, it's never just laughter. It's a reminder, a signal, a dismissal wrapped in civility. Crockett didn't flinch. She kept her eyes on the page, her pen tracing a note as if the noise behind her were background static. But her silence said more than any speech could. I've heard this tone before, and I'm still here. Meanwhile, beyond the chamber, the microphones had done their job. The moment traveled faster than anyone could contain it. The hearing was live-streamed. Clips hit social media within minutes. Someone rewound the footage, looped the laugh, slowed it down. Did the speaker just laugh at her mid-testimony? One tweet read, already racking up thousands of shares. Another added, it's always the same to mock her, then act surprised when she dismantles you. Comment sections flooded with fury and familiarity. People who'd been talked over in boardrooms, interrupted in classrooms, underestimated in interviews, they recognized the scene instantly. That chuckle wasn't about politics. It was about power. The symbolism began to take shape. A powerful man's laugh against a poised woman's calm. The optics were inescapable. One represented inherited confidence. The other earned composure. And yet the irony hung in the air. Johnson believed he was lightening the mood, reclaiming control, restoring order. But what he was really doing was underscoring every reason her voice mattered in that room. The smallness of the moment became its magnitude. Because in 2025 America, nothing small stays small, not when cameras are rolling, not when millions are watching, and certainly not when mockery meets moral resolve. By the time the hearing reached its midpoint, the laughter had already mutated online into a movement. Memes captioned "When accountability becomes a joke" spread alongside side-by-side photos. His grin, her glare. But inside that chamber, he had no idea the storm waiting outside its walls. He leaned back, satisfied, unaware that his condescension was becoming content, that his smirk was about to become a symbol. What Mike Johnson didn't realize was that his laugh had already lit the fuse of a viral storm. Mike Johnson had mastered the art of composure. To the casual observer, he looked every bit the model of civility. Crisp suit, unshakable calm, voice softened by the cadence of church and courtroom alike. He spoke in scripture-laced sound bites, always invoking principle, always tethering himself to a moral high ground that seemed unreachable to those who questioned him. It was this calm, almost pastoral presence that earned him the reputation of a man above the noise. But those who had crossed paths with him long enough knew better. The calm was armor, not virtue. He had built his career on it. The smile that never cracked, the chuckle that replaced confrontation, the way he leaned on humor as a shield against scrutiny. When pressed on policy contradictions or moral inconsistencies, he would tilt his head, let a small grin spread across his face, and offer a line so soft it barely felt like evasion. But it always was. The laughter, the warmth were tools, not traits. To his supporters, it looked like grace under fire. To his critics, it looked like something else entirely. The steady hand of a man who'd never had to feel the burn of accountability. There were patterns, small and precise. During a tense budget hearing months earlier, when a congresswoman had cited child poverty statistics that undercut his proposed cuts, he'd smiled and said, "We all want what's best for children." Then he moved on, unruffled, untouched. When confronted about a bill limiting reproductive rights, he'd offered a polite laugh and said, "We're just protecting life, ma'am." The room had gone silent, as if politeness could erase pain. This was his gift-weaponized restraint. He never shouted, never lost control, never exposed the pulse behind the policy. His calmness made others look emotional, irrational, unhinged. It was the oldest political magic trick. Make empathy look like hysteria. Off camera, he was fond of quoting family values, always invoking faith and virtue. He often spoke about unity, about listening to each other, about leading with kindness. But the kindness was conditional, extended upward, withheld downward. It flowed freely when cameras were kind to him, but froze when someone questioned his contradictions. Behind closed doors, aides whispered about his reliance on charm to bury discomfort. "If you keep smiling," he once told a colleague after a particularly brutal session, "they'll never know they got to you." It wasn't a philosophy. It was a survival mechanism. He believed civility wasn't a bridge, it was a barrier, one that kept him above the fray and beyond reproach. That belief was his quiet arrogance. He didn't mock with volume. He mocked with control. He thought he could laugh his way through scrutiny, that the optics of composure would always outweigh the ethics of empathy. He believed that staying calm made him righteous, and that tone itself was morality. And yet, the cracks were showing. Clips from previous hearings circulated his grin when a congressman stumbled on data, his half-laugh when a reporter asked about ethics investigations, his harmless jokes that always seemed to land on the same kind of people. To the untrained eye, they looked trivial. To the people watching closely, they painted a pattern. A man who believed that mockery, when delivered softly enough, wasn't mockery at all. That belief insulated him until Jasmine Crockett stepped into the frame. She didn't rise to his bait, didn't feed the performance. Her calm mirrored his, but it came from somewhere different. Hers was earned through resistance. His was learned through privilege. He had built his identity on the illusion that civility was character. That laughing off confrontation proved strength, that as long as his tone stayed measured, he could say anything and still be the adult in the room. He didn't realize that the same stillness he weaponized in others would one day be used against him. In the moment before his laugh echoed through the chamber, Johnson likely thought he was being disarming, reminding everyone that he, the speaker, was above irritation. But what he didn't see was the shift in the country's temperature. The patience for polite condescension had run dry. Every smirk that once softened headlines was now being replayed with new meaning. Every laugh that once seemed good-natured now felt like a quiet insult to those who had spent lifetimes earning the right to speak. He wasn't a villain in the cinematic sense. He didn't snarl or shout. He didn't need to. His villainy lived in the comfort of knowing he could offend without consequence, in believing that dignity belonged only to those who mirrored his tone. But in politics, the same calm smile that shields you can become the mirror that exposes you. Long before Jasmine Crockett sat beneath the lights of Congress, she learned what silence could do. Not the silence of fear, but of strategy. She grew up in the quiet corners of Texas, where strength wasn't measured by volume, but by how long you could hold your ground before speaking. Her mother used to tell her, "You don't have to raise your voice to raise your worth." It wasn't advice, it was survival. In high school debates, she was the girl who didn't fidget. While others tangled themselves in emotion, Jasmine waited. She would let her opponents burn their words fast, trip over their own conviction, then step forward with one precise line that changed the tone of the room. Teachers called it composure. She knew it was more than that. It was armor forged from being told again and again that her brilliance had to prove itself twice before it was believed once. She carried that composure into law school, where the same dynamic followed her like a shadow. In study groups, men interrupted her mid-sentence. In mock trials, judges mistook her for an intern. Each time, she didn't snap back. She simply learned how to let the insult breathe long enough for the room to feel its own discomfort. Then she'd dismantle the argument in front of them, piece by piece, until even the ones who doubted her were taking notes. Her first courtroom job was in public defense, gritty, underfunded, exhausting work. She defended the clients no one wanted, the ones already branded guilty by poverty and skin color. The courthouse air was thick with prejudice, but Jasmine learned to move through it like wind through wire, unseen, yet unstoppable. Judges called her passionate. Prosecutors called her intense. But her clients called her something else. The one who listens. Every victory came with the same ritual. After a long day in court, she'd drive home with the radio low, replaying each exchange in her head not for mistakes, but for meaning. Where did they try to shake her composure? When did her stillness make them falter? She noticed a pattern. In every room where she refused to lose her calm, power shifted. When she entered politics, it wasn't to trade her courtroom for a camera. It was to widen the stage of accountability. She saw how policy and prejudice were cousins, how the same system that underfunded defendants also underrepresented districts like hers. Running for Congress wasn't ambition, it was obligation. She'd spent years watching laws weaponized against the voiceless. Now she wanted to write them differently. But politics wasn't built for her kind of patience. It rewarded sound bites over sentences, volume over value. Male colleagues mistook her restraint for hesitation, her poise for passivity. Reporters praised her composure under pressure, without realizing it was forged from 1,000 small humiliations she'd endured to stand in that very spot. She often reminded her team of her philosophy. Dignity isn't silence, it's measured fire. It wasn't just a mantra. It was a discipline. Dignity didn't mean you stayed quiet. It meant you chose when to make the world listen. There were nights she sat in her office long after hearings ended, the Capitol dome glowing faintly outside her window. She'd stare at the marble corridors that had carried centuries of voices like hers, too few and too often dismissed. She thought of the women before her, the ones who had spoken truth at great cost, and she felt their echoes in her chest. The weight wasn't pressure. It was inheritance. Flashbacks flicker like film, her cross-examining a smug witness who thought charm could outwit facts, her raising her hand in a heated debate, waiting until the noise subsided before delivering a line that flipped the entire argument. In each moment, the same rhythm: restraint, release, revelation. There were times she lost cases where justice never showed up, hearings where decency felt like theater, but even then, her composure never cracked. People mistook it for coldness, but those who knew her best understood. She had simply learned how to save her fire for the moment it mattered most. And in Congress, those moments came often. She'd grown used to interruptions, to men who smiled while stepping on her words. Every time it happened, she marked it, stored it, and waited. Not for revenge, but for resonance. She believed in choosing your strike like a surgeon, not a soldier. That belief is what set her apart. Her calm wasn't emptiness, it was full of calculation. Her quiet wasn't retreat, it was restraint. And in that stillness there was a kind of defiance few understood. Because in a world addicted to noise, silence from a woman like her wasn't passive, it was powerful. So when she walked into that committee hearing, 20 minutes before the laugh that would echo across America, she wasn't walking in unprepared. She carried the weight of every courtroom where her voice had been doubted, every debate where she'd been talked over, every smirk that told her she didn't belong. And she carried something else too, an unspoken promise to every girl watching from the margins, that dignity doesn't crumble under laughter. It outlasts it. She knew what it meant to be underestimated. She knew how quickly condescension could spread when power felt cornered. And she knew, better than anyone, that ridicule is the last refuge of those who fear accountability. So when that laugh echoed through the chamber, she didn't flinch. She remembered every room that tried to laugh her out. The exchange began like any other procedural, polite, almost dull. Crockett's voice was measured, her rhythm deliberate. She was dissecting numbers, tracing inconsistencies in the budget Johnson's office had just defended. The words weren't fireworks. They were scalpels. Each question cut deeper. Johnson at first wore his trademark calm, that faint smile he used like punctuation. But when she pressed on the missing allocations, when her logic began cornering his narrative, the smirk twitched. He leaned back in his chair, folded his arms, and let out a quiet chuckle. It wasn't loud enough to seem hostile, but it was sharp enough to echo. Cameras caught it. The microphones, too. It slipped into the live feed like a needle through cloth. A few colleagues laughed with him, small, uncertain laughs, the kind people share when they sense power is being tested and want to stand near it. Crockett didn't react. She just paused, turned a page in her notes, and asked the next question as if nothing had happened. But the rhythm of the room had changed. You could feel the air, once brisk with debate, now hung heavy with quiet tension. Her tone stayed professional, but there was a new stillness beneath it. Every word felt sharpened. She was making her point not just for the record, but for the principle. Johnson's laughter was no longer background noise. It had become part of the story. Then it happened again. A second laugh. Not full, not forced, but the kind that says I don't take you seriously. This time it wasn't hidden behind decorum. It came mid-sentence, cutting through her words like a punctuation mark of privilege. The camera panned automatically toward her. Every viewer watching at home could sense that something in her stillness had shifted. Crockett stopped mid-sentence. No dramatics, no sigh, just silence. She looked down at her notes for a moment, then lifted her head slowly, deliberately, and turned to face him directly. For the first time, Johnson met her eyes. His smirk held, faint but visible. But the silence that followed felt different this time. The kind that doesn't fade expands. The room froze. Even the air seemed to hesitate. Aides glanced up from their screens. A camera operator adjusted focus. You could almost hear hearts sinking to the same rhythm of anticipation. When Crockett finally spoke, her voice had dropped to something low and precise. Calm, so controlled it felt dangerous. I hope you're laughing because transparency is a joke to you, not because I am. The words landed like a gavel. There was no need for volume. The echo did the work. The laughter died instantly, not out of guilt, but out of realization. Johnson's eyes blinked once, the way someone does when they're recalibrating the weight of their own expression. For a second, no one moved. Even her allies, used to her poise, looked stunned. This wasn't anger. It wasn't a performance. It was a reclamation. Crockett didn't let the silence go to waste. She straightened her posture, not to intimidate, but to finish what she started. Because if accountability makes you laugh, she said evenly, maybe the public deserves to know what honesty sounds like in your voice. A murmur rippled through the chamber. A reporter's pen froze mid-note. Someone whispered her name under their breath like it was both warning and awe. Johnson's face, once relaxed, was now unreadable. He gave a short nod, an attempt at composure, but the stillness had already betrayed him. The laughter he once controlled had turned against him. The atmosphere thickened again, but differently this time, not tension from confrontation, but from balance restored. Crockett's restraint had shifted the energy, the same way a courtroom shifts when a witness realizes the lawyer's questions weren't casual. From that point, she didn't have to raise her voice. Every word she spoke carried the unspoken message. I see you. I hear you. And I'm not afraid of the sound of your silence. The camera lingered on Johnson's face, his smirk now replaced by the thin neutrality of someone realizing the ground has moved beneath them. Viewers at home didn't need a narrator to understand what had just happened. The room wasn't the same. The hierarchy had tilted. Her question had turned into confrontation. Her calm had turned into command. And as the silence lingered, one thought pulsed through the audience in the chamber and beyond. This isn't the moment she broke composure. This is the moment composure broke him. But her next line would do more than end his laughter. It would rewrite the tone of the entire chamber. The pause stretched like an inhale the nation seemed to share. Every camera light glowed red. Every reporter leaned forward, pens hovering. Jasmine Crockett didn't rush. She didn't need to. She had the kind of calm that only comes from knowing the truth is on your side. Her voice, when it returned, was sharper now, not louder, but honed. Let's go line by line, shall we? She lifted a document, the budget report Johnson had touted as evidence of transparency and fiscal integrity. Her fingers brushed the pages like she was handling evidence at trial. On March 4th, your office allocated $2.7 million to community outreach. Yet, when asked for records of those expenditures, not one invoice was produced. Not one. A few heads turned. Staffers began glancing at one another, searching for confirmation or cover. Then April 11th, another $900,000 labeled communications infrastructure. Yet the same firm appears in campaign expenditures. Coincidence? She tilted her head slightly, not mocking, but dissecting. You tell me, Mr. Speaker. Johnson's posture shifted just a fraction. His hands clasped tighter, knuckles pale against the table. The smirk that had carried him through 100 hearings was gone. Crockett continued, unbroken. May 2nd, travel reimbursements for meetings that, by your own calendar, never happened. June 18th, a faith-based leadership summit, hosted in a private donor's home. And now this chamber sits here pretending accountability is a punchline. No one moved. No one dared to. This isn't about jokes, she said, the quietness of her tone commanding more attention than any gavel could. It's about the message it sends when laughter is your answer to scrutiny. Johnson cleared his throat, leaning toward the mic. Congresswoman, with all due respect. But she didn't let him finish. She didn't need to raise her voice. Her words simply cut through his. With all due respect, Mr. Speaker, she said. Respect is earned, not assumed. Gasps fluttered around the chamber like paper caught in the wind. Aides stared at their screens, frozen mid-type. A few seats down, a congressman adjusted his tie, trying to mask a grin. Even her critics, the ones who usually rolled their eyes when she spoke, stayed silent. She let the silence breathe. Then came the pivot. The shift from precision to purpose. This isn't the first time laughter has been used as armor, she continued, her eyes never leaving him. When women speak, it's called emotion. When black women demand answers, it's called attitude. And when power is cornered, it calls for comedy. The words landed like slow thunder. The audience wasn't just watching a debate. They were watching imbalance being recalibrated in real time. Johnson looked down briefly, rearranging his papers, searching for something to do with his hands. The stillness of the room only amplified every flicker of discomfort. Crockett pressed on. But here's the truth, Mr. Speaker. Laughter doesn't erase ledgers. It doesn't rewrite facts. It doesn't hide the numbers that don't add up. Transparency doesn't need a sense of humor. It needs a conscience. Her voice held steady, unwavering. And if you think accountability is beneath you, then maybe it's not the budget that needs balancing. Maybe it's the leadership. Every sentence hit like a measured strike, unhurried, deliberate. By now, the tension was physical, the kind that makes even the strongest figures shrink slightly under the weight of their own attention. One reporter in the back whispered, "She's freezing him out." And then the moment, Crockett paused again, eyes lowering briefly to her notes, then lifting back toward him with unshakable calm. The chamber seemed to lean in. "You may find humor in accountability, Mr. Speaker, but America doesn't." The air thinned. You could hear the faint hum of a recording device. Her final words landed with surgical precision. "We're laughing less," she said softly, "and listening more." The silence afterward wasn't absence, it was resonance. A silence that meant something. The kind that follows truth is too clean to argue with. Johnson didn't move. His face, once confident, now looked almost ordinary. Humans, unmasked. Phones began to lift. A camera flash sparked. A murmur spread across the room like a wave cresting too late to stop. Someone near the back whispered, "She froze him." And just like that, the laughter that had started the confrontation vanished, replaced by the collective sound of realization. Within minutes, the clip hit social media, first as a snippet, then as a storm. She just ended him with one sentence, one tweet read. Another captioned the moment, "Accountability isn't funny anymore." Comment sections flooded, thousands of voices chiming in. Some cheering, others seething, but all watching. By the end of the day, news outlets ran the headline, "Crockett's calm freezes the chamber." But inside that room, the story wasn't over. Crockett didn't bask, didn't gloat. She gathered her notes, gave a quiet nod, and took her seat. Because this wasn't about a win, it was about balance restored. Every viewer, whether in the room or behind a screen, could feel that something had shifted. It wasn't just about budgets anymore. It was about tone, dignity, and the cost of underestimating a woman who has learned to turn silence into strategy. Her final glance at Johnson wasn't vindictive. It was defining. It said, "Now you understand why we don't flinch anymore." And as she leaned back, the chamber still frozen in that echo of her words, the world outside had already begun replaying it again and again, not for entertainment, but for affirmation, because every person who had ever been laughed at while speaking truth saw themselves in that moment, and every person who had ever been dismissed learned something that day. Calm doesn't mean powerless. It means to be patient until it's time to strike, and as the clip spread across every platform, the laughter that began as mockery became a monument to her composure. The next morning, the nation woke to a freeze-frame Jasmine Crockett mid-sentence. Eye steady, voice calm, the caption beneath her reading, "We're laughing less and listening more," and it wasn't just a clip. It was an event. Within hours, now frozen chamber was everywhere. Twitter, Instagram, TikTok. The words pulsed through timelines like a heartbeat. Someone looped her line over a cinematic score, strings rising, audience gasping. Mike Johnson blinking in slow motion. Another creator turned it into a remix. Crockett's calm layered over protest footage. Her voice echoing, "Accountability isn't a joke." The internet moved fast. But this time it moved with purpose. Political commentators broke it down frame by frame, her pause, her tone, the micro-expression of his fading smirk. That, one viral post read, is what happens when discipline meets entitlement. By noon, news alerts carried headlines like "Crockett freezes the chamber and the internet." Late-night hosts picked it up that evening. One opened his monologue with a grin. Mike Johnson laughed once, the audience roared. Another segment played the clip on loop, adding exaggerated ice-cracking sound effects as the crowd cheered. But amid the humor, the tone shifted. "That's what composure looks like under fire," one host said softly before cutting to commercial. Cable panels erupted in debate. One pundit insisted, "It was disrespectful that she called out the speaker on live television." Another shot back, "No," she responded to disrespect. "There's a difference." The moderator leaned in. And the difference, she said, was grace. In living rooms across America, people watched that exchange not as politics, but as poetry. Clips flooded TikTok under captions like, "When calm becomes power," and "Her silence spoke louder than his laughter." Teenagers reenacted the scene in mock congressional hearings. A teacher in Texas played it before her civics class, saying, "This is what leadership under pressure looks like." Even some conservatives grudgingly gave her credit. "That was brutal," one commentator admitted on air, "but fair. She didn't lose her cool, she owned it." Meanwhile, progressive voices turned the moment into a rallying point. Hashtags spawned campaigns. "Dignity isn't silence," one post read. "It's measured fire." Within 24 hours, that quote alone had over 1 million shares. Comment sections transformed into forums for empathy. Women across professions, lawyers, teachers, nurses wrote, "I've been there. I know that laugh." Others chimed in, "This wasn't about politics. It was about respect." Memes flourished, but none of them mocked her. They celebrated her restraint, her precision, her refusal to let mockery define the moment. Someone edited the video into a short film trailer with dramatic score. Black fade-ins, the final line appearing in white letters. "We're laughing less and listening more." Within days, commentators were calling it the quote of the year. But beyond the trending hashtags, something more lasting was taking shape. The tone of conversation had shifted. It wasn't about whether Crockett won the exchange. It was about how she did with composure instead of chaos, with dignity instead of disdain, political. Analysts began calling it a masterclass in controlled power. Editorials ran headlines like "How Calm Became the New Courage" and "The Science of Freezing Arrogance." Social psychologists were invited to morning shows to explain why her tone hit so hard. "Because restraint under pressure," one said, "isn't weakness, it's mastery. It exposes the fragility of arrogance." At rallies, supporters began quoting her words on signs. "Listen more. Laugh less. Accountability isn't a joke." Her sentence had become a slogan. The mirror reflecting a wider exhaustion, with mockery masquerading as leadership. And for many Americans watching, especially women of color, the moment transcended politics, became symbolic. Not about one hearing, but every room where composure had to do the work of self-defense. One viral tweet read, "She didn't just freeze the chamber. She thawed a nation tired of pretending laughter is harmless." Even those who didn't agree with her politics couldn't ignore the magnitude. The video's reach crossed lines that arguments rarely did, from progressives to independents, to quiet viewers who simply admired grace under fire. By the end of the week, journalists were calling it the moment dignity went viral. And somewhere, deep within the endless scroll of praise and analysis, someone posted a simple clip with no music, no edits, no captions. Just the raw silence that followed her final line. It racked up millions of views in a single night, because people weren't watching for entertainment anymore. They were watching to feel that silence again. That silence wasn't emptiness. It was validation. It was the sound of a power that didn't need to shout to be heard. And as the news cycle spun, one truth lingered long after the hashtags began to fade. That what froze the chamber wasn't her words alone, but the mirror they forced everyone to face. But beneath the viral fame lay a deeper message that too many missed. The chamber had returned to its usual rhythm, the echoes of laughter long gone, replaced by the soft shuffle of papers and quiet murmurs. But the reverberations of that single moment lingered far beyond marble walls and microphones. Jasmine Crockett's composure had done something rare. It had transformed spectacle into clarity. In a world awash with noise, where mockery is louder than truth and applause often drowns conviction, her calm had spoken volumes. It wasn't dramatic gestures or raised voices that captured attention. It was the precision of her restraint, the deliberate weight behind every word. In that silence, power had been measured not by volume but by virtue. Her stance became a mirror for every viewer, a reminder that dignity isn't performative, and that strength doesn't always roar. Some might have thought laughter would topple her, ridicule would fracture resolve. But Crockett showed that in the face of derision, calm isn't weakness, it is defiance. It was easy to forget that the chamber, like the world outside it, often rewards spectacle over substance. Political theater dominates headlines, viral moments overshadow careful reasoning, and loudness masquerades as leadership. But her measured response reminded everyone that authority built on arrogance and smirks is brittle. Humility, patience, and principle are what endure. Voice-over-style reflections circulated immediately, highlighting the metaphor her composure had become. Every teacher, lawyer, activist, or student who had ever been laughed at while speaking truth saw themselves in that moment. They saw validation in restraint, Power in patience and proof that being underestimated is not a sentence, it's an opportunity. Crockett's restraint had become resistance. She didn't need to shout. She didn't need to humiliate her opponent. Her act of standing taller, of letting the facts land, of holding silence long enough for it to resonate, was revolutionary in its simplicity. It was a subtle but seismic reminder. Dignity requires no amplification. It needs only presence. The laughter she had faced wasn't random. It was a test of character. It exposed arrogance, entitlement, and the fragility of those who lean on mockery to maintain control. In contrast, Crockett's reaction demonstrated that true power doesn't need to assert itself through cruelty. It asserts itself through unflinching principle, through the quiet but undeniable authority of evidence and integrity. Her words, her calm, her gaze all served as a lesson that could travel far beyond politics. That anyone in any room could take a stand not by raising a voice but by maintaining it with precision and dignity. That when provoked, resistance can be measured, and composure can become its most potent weapon. Because when power laughs at dignity, dignity doesn't shout back. It simply stands taller. And standing taller doesn't just protect oneself. It inspires. It teaches observers that silence can carry more weight than uproar, that patience can deliver more consequence than anger, and that measured responses can rewrite the narratives that culture and media often try to force upon us. In every echo of that chamber, the message was clear. Strength is not always aggressive, authority is not always loud, and respect is earned not by overpowering others, but by demonstrating consistency in principle. The world watched, absorbed, and began to understand, some slowly. Some instantly, that calm truth can topple arrogance without ever raising its voice. Her composure became a blueprint for anyone who has been dismissed, interrupted, or underestimated. A reminder that the power of presence is a force unto itself, and that every room can be reshaped when courage meets patience. And in that realization, there was healing, reflection, empowerment. The public had witnessed not just a congressional exchange, but a model for standing tall in the face of scorn. A reminder that respect is not demanded through loudness, but proven through integrity. And that's why this wasn't just a moment in Congress. It was a message for every voice ever mocked into silence. Her icy response didn't freeze the chamber because she was cold. It froze the chamber because calm, measured truth has a way of forcing reflection, or pausing the noise long enough for the weight of accountability to land where it belongs. Every smirk, every chuckle, every attempt at dismissal was met not with anger, but with the unshakable force of principle. And in that stillness, the room and the nation watching had no choice but to reckon with itself. In a world where mockery often drowns out reason, her composure became a reminder. Power is temporary, but integrity resonates. It travels farther than laughter, louder than jeers, and deeper than any political theater ever could. The echo of her voice, deliberate and precise, transformed a single moment into a lesson about dignity, justice, and the courage to stand unshaken. Because when truth stands unshaken, even power must pause to feel the chill. Her example isn't just for those in Congress. It's for anyone who has been dismissed, interrupted, or belittled. It's proof that standing tall, speaking facts, and holding your ground even quietly can shift the balance of any room, any conversation, any moment in time. If you believe dignity should never bow to arrogance, hit subscribe. Because this isn't just commentary. This isn't just a viral clip. This is justice in action. Stand with the truth. Stand with resilience. And let every moment of mockery meet the calm, unwavering force of principle. Her icy response froze the chamber, and it can inspire every one of us to freeze the noise and reclaim the power of our own voices.